You are listening to the spookiest video game podcast in the world. This is the Saluki Gamescast for episode 59, October 27th, 2023. My name is Justin Young. Joining me as always are Mario Sanders and OJ Duncan. How are you all doing this very spooky Friday?
I'm doing okay. It's been a fine-ish week. Nothing too exciting.
Has it been spooky for you?
No, but I avoid spooky. That's not really my vibe.
I'm very spooktacular, Justin. Thank you for asking.
I am happy to hear that. I'm happy you are having a spooktacular October. That makes me be very, very happy. And Mario, meanwhile, makes me very sad. Yeah. Like avoiding spooky. Who does that? What kind of human being would intentionally avoid the spooky?
Or the Halloween Grinch.
Oh, that's a film they should make. The Halloween Grinch. The Grinch likes setting in a very calm, relaxed state at all times.
All the boos down in Booville like Halloween a lot.
They're all like boos from Super Mario World.
Yes.
Oh, and we have Mario. Mm-hmm. That's why Mario doesn't like the spooky. Yeah. He really doesn't like the booze. All right. Yeah, it is Friday. Obviously, Halloween coming up very quickly on Tuesday. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But why don't we just jump straight into what you've been playing? Mario, why don't you start us off? What have you been playing?
Yeah, so the two games that I played this week, last week for Friday, for our N64 group, we played the other James Bond game, The World Is Not Enough. And I think it might be, I think if people consider this a hot take because of the nostalgia for GoldenEye. Mm-hmm. I think that game is better than GoldenEye is. At least the campaign. Maybe people don't have nostalgia for the GoldenEye campaign the way they do for the multiplayer. Mm-hmm. But I think Twine is a more consistent game. While GoldenEye may have some higher highs, it also has significantly lower lows.
And it's a first person shooter. Yeah, it's like it, right? This isn't when they got into like all the car levels. And all that.
This is the only. I mean, it's still a shooter. You're on like skis and you're like skiing down, but you still have the first person. You're still shooting and all that sort of stuff. It's just more of an auto scroller,
kind of on rails.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that I think I can understand why it's more forgettable than GoldenEye. Mm-hmm. It's also not made by Rare, so the music isn't as good either. But like I said, I think the levels are more consistent. There's less of a variance in terms of how angry I'm getting playing the game. Because the end of GoldenEye, those like last 5 levels are just brutal.
I think a lot of people, like GoldenEye is one of those games that I really believe people have not gone back and played. Mm-hmm. And so they really are viewing it from how did they feel about that game in 1996, right? Like that's how people still think about and talk about that game. And I get it because I'm guilty of this as well. But I think when you're right, when you go back and you play that game, there's levels. I'm trying to think what that level is. The one where you're with all the like statues outside and everything. It's at night.
Statue.
Is that the statue? Okay. I kept thinking it was something like that, but I was like, I'm going to get it wrong if I like venture an actual guess. But yeah, like that level's just, it's almost impossible to figure out your way through that level. And I know I'm saying that people are like, get good. But like, I went back and played that when they released it on modern systems, right? A year, 2 years ago. And when I got to that level, I was like, yeah, this level is a real pain. Like, it's really difficult to figure out where you're going, where you've been. And like, yeah, you can kind of figure it out eventually. And then it seems simple, but you know, that level and the jungle, like several of those levels are really just because of the muddy sort of graphics of the N64 are really kind of a pain to get through.
And they're so dark. Like there's like multiple levels that are just so dark and make it so hard to see. And as you said, The Nintendo 64 doesn't help that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like I said, I don't, better is maybe not accurate. I do think it's a more consistent game though, where there aren't any levels. There's like only maybe one, and it's the one where you have to fight the helicopter in The World Is Not Enough. That I'm just like, oh, but there's new. It's like, it's the entire back half of GoldenEye. That I'm just like, let me play up to like this level, and then we'll just call it good.
I think one of the issues too with GoldenEye, part of those rose-colored glasses, is that was a lot of people's first experience with an multiplayer first-person shooter, right? Like, I think you're right when you say the multiplayer. That is what people remember. They remember I remember this at my friend Kevin's house, sitting on the couch, eating pizza, and playing that for hours on end, right? And that was a fantastic experience, but there's no way to ever recapture that experience.
Sure.
Right? Like, because if you play that multiplayer now, you're like, this is, there's so much better multiplayer now out there to play in a game. And that was cool because at the time, it was the first time you could do that easily with friends.
Yeah, absolutely. So we played that. And then the other game that I checked out this week is called Driftwood. I think it's called Driftwood. It's an early access, and basically...
Is this the sloth?
Yeah, this is the sloth, and you are longboarding down different like mountain roads. And that's all the game is. The music is fantastic. It controls mostly fine. It's still buggy because it's an early access, but it's a fun, like, mostly turn off your brain game. All you're doing is just like turning with the road. And it's a very like, okay. So take a deep breath.
Yeah, that game, I've seen that game, and it looks really cool. What were you playing this on?
Steam. I bought it on Steam.
Okay. Yeah, I'd seen it pop up and everything, and it looks really cool. I watched some video of it. It seems very chill for the most part. I think, that's kind of what you said about it.
And I think the one thing that's really great about it is, I don't think I've played through all of the different maps, but while I think I've maybe played through 5 or 6 maps, each map has like multiple paths. So, you've got like the main road, but then there's like this dirt road that you can take, and this like sort of overpass walkway that you can take. And so it adds an element of replayability to each level as well, because each level has 3 goals, or most levels have 3 goals associated with it. And it's like, hit all of these things, or go through all of this, or do all of that. And so it's, some of them are like time-based, get to the bottom in less than 2 minutes or less than 3 minutes. And so those different paths allow you to explore different parts of the area. And then the other excellent part of the game is, as you travel from like map to map, you go into this overworld where you're driving this like old school VW bus, which just feels appropriate for somebody who would be like bombing this like on a longboard down this like like this country mountain road type of thing.
And happens to be a sloth.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a very satisfying game. I think it's on sale until the end of the month, or at least that's what I saw on Steam. I think the sale ends on the 1st. I don't remember how much it was. I don't feel like it was more than like $15 though.
Okay.
And that might have been, the $15 might have been the regular. But yeah, I'd say it's like I said, definitely still buggy. There are absolutely times where you'll get some air, and I don't think the game wants you to get air, because when you land, you just go like right through the ground and like fall
that's a pretty
forever.
big bug.
Yeah. So like I said, there's definitely like, but it sounds like they are certainly still working on it. I was watching a friend play it, and he was saying, or somebody else was saying, that they have a hope of creating like a multiplayer where it'd be like I assume would be a race, or that'd be cool to just have like a casual going down the mountain side by side. There's I don't know how famous it is. It was famous for me and my cousin. Video of these two guys in Berkeley. They were called the Blue Suit Bombers, and they were just like going down this hill and like passing the camera back and forth as they're longboarding down, the Oakland, Berkeley hills. And like I said, so even if it was just that, like it's not even a race or like combat racing, it's just like you and a bud going down this mountain road together, I think would be very satisfying.
So you're telling me there are multiple paths to this game, and there are multiple goals for each level. So it sounds like the ultimate combination of Beetle Adventure Racing and GoldenEye.
Well, I mean, I don't know about all that. This game is much more relaxing than either of those two games are.
I don't know. I was really relaxed playing Beetle Adventure Racing. It's a pretty chill racing game. All right, so Driftwood and The World Is Not Enough.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay. OJ.
So I haven't really been playing that much this week either. I've been watching a lot of people play Super Mario Brothers Wonder, but I'm going to let you talk about that. Did you guys pick up the Connections game by chance at all?
I looked at it. Like I said, I've been familiar with the game, but I actually looked at it on the New York Times site.
I downloaded the Snell game.
Oh, okay. How are you liking it?
I haven't played a ton of it so far. Like what I've played of it so far seems like fun for like a phone game. And I feel like phone games, for me at least, I have to play a lot of them for them to really sink their claws into me, so to speak, right? Like, so, Marvel Snap, like the first time I played that game, I was kind of like, I don't know about this. But like the more I played it, the more I kind of got into that game. So I hope to spend some more time with it, like when I just have some free time.
It's a good little time waster. And then once you get settled in it, you can check once or twice a day for a little bit and get your stuff done. And yeah, I really like it. I'm actually, I was thinking today that I'm going to go back to Marvel Snap a little bit, I think. Start playing that a lot more.
I still have that installed. I still play it, not as much as I did like when it first came out, when we were all kind of really into it for a while. I think I've said this before. That game has the meta of that game has kind of spoiled it a little bit for me. The fact that like you play it and it's very clear that there are people who have watched YouTube videos of this is the correct way to play a hand, and like if they do not get those cards dealt in the way that they want them, they'll like quit from a match, and it becomes very like sort of rote, right? Like I feel like when that game first launched, it was a whole lot of almost like a chess match of figuring it out, where now it seems almost on autopilot against a lot of people.
Okay, that sucks.
Yeah, I mean, that's my experience, at least as you get into the upper levels. The lower levels are still very much so. Every time it resets for a new season, those are fantastic still, because those people are still like new to the game and they're not playing it that way.
Yeah.
It makes it fun with them.
Do you have any experience, either of you, with Magic the Gathering?
I do not.
Okay, I was going to say, has it sort of reached that point where it's been out long enough where it's like a tier list and like these are the competitive decks, and this is the one, like if you're trying to really compete for anything, you kind of have to be running one of these like 4 or 5 decks, otherwise you got to get incredibly lucky. Does it feel like that?
Yeah, I mean, it very much feels to me like, okay, I watched this video on YouTube that says if you play these cards in this order with these locations, that it will be, you'll get this this sort of string of, bonuses and everything off of it, and that is the way to win. And I would even wager, and I have not looked this up, so I'm not just trying to complain. I don't care if I win at that game. I win enough. I probably win like half the games I play, which is fine by me, because it's really there for a time waster. But I would wager that there is somewhere a web page you can go to and enter the cards that you have, and it will tell you what you should play and what order. because that's what it feels like when I'm playing against some people. Like the time they take to play their next card and everything, it feels like they are looking up, like, what do I do next? And to me, that's not fun.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right? Like, and so that when I say the meta of the game, that's what I'm referring to with it. So, yeah, I think that's probably what you're talking about with Magic the Gathering. I just have no experience with that. So
Yeah, it's maybe a little different in the sense of this sounds like there's a very particular sequencing of cards that you would also need to do. Whereas, I mean, there's certainly ideal sequencing, but
right.
Maybe not even to that extent. In Magic, there's a little more variance because the decks are a lot small. The decks in Snap are how many cards are in those?
You can have up to 7 cards in your hand, but like the deck you build is, I don't remember.
Okay,
I would have to look.
Yeah,
it's much smaller than Magic.
In like the constructed formats, Magic the Gathering decks are 60 cards. So
Yeah,
there's
it's
like
much smaller than that.
and you the most you can run is, unless the card says otherwise, is 4 copies of a card. So there is a lot more variance. I know I just saw something the other day that they tried to run Magic through like an AI prediction thing, like to be able to predict the outcome of games, and it like could not do it. You know, I know they've talked a lot, about like the complexity of Magic. Like I said, I didn't know if in terms of like what that, when you say the meta of Snap, just that's the reference that I have, because I've never played Snap, so trying to put it into that understanding.
I mean, my understanding is, and just like from what I've seen of Magic the Gathering, is that this is a much more simplified card game.
Yeah.
And it was
much
meant
more-
to be.
Yeah, much more stripped down. This is meant for people like me who don't play card games. But I think the trade-off with that is, it's become very much, this is how it feels playing it, that there are certain sequences, and that when people start a hand, they're just setting out to play that sequence of cards, right? They're not they're not sort of winging it as they go.
Sure.
And that's fine. Like, I get, like, that's the way you have to play to, like, be top tier, but it also takes a lot of the fun out of the game.
Yeah.
Because, it takes the chess mechanic out of it, and it sort of becomes of, well, I have it written down here, which cards I need to play in which order. And it's like, okay, well, like, cool, I guess.
Do they do, when they change seasons, is there like a pool of cards that you can pick from? Or is it just like every card that's been released you can put in, you could put any combination of any card in your deck? Or is it like, here's this pool of 100 cards that you have to pick from? Okay.
There any cards. Sometimes there are incentives because there's like challenges for you to reach, and sometimes those incentives will be like, have this card in your deck and that sort of thing. But no, it's wide open which cards. So again, right, like you end up with people who have figured out this is the best deck, and they're just going to run that all the time.
Sure.
So there's less incentive to vary up your strategy.
Or to even just explore.
Right.
Right? Like if you're trying to play at that high of a level, there's not much chance to like, let me try out this new thing.
Right. So there are some challenges that encourage that. So there'll be ones that like, discard 15 cards from your deck. And so you have to have a card whose special ability is to discard. But yeah, by and large, that incentive is not there.
Interesting.
So,
yeah. I've watched one friend in particular. He plays it a lot, and watching somebody play a game, especially like that, even if it is meant to be very simple, you're like, I have no idea what's going on. But
they're really good at onboarding you to the game. Like there's a tutorial in the game and everything. And again, as somebody who doesn't play those card games, I mean, I've played some card games at some point. I've never really gotten into them. This one was super simple to get into. Because once you learn the basics, it's really just learning what each new card does, and they have it spelled out on it. It's not like this isn't Dota where you need to memorize what the pros and cons of each character are or anything like that. So sorry, OJ, we completely go off to you talking.
It's fine because I haven't been playing much anyway, so I appreciate that. But yeah, so connections. It's been pretty rough this past week. I think I got 2 out of the past 7 of them. And Wordle, I missed a couple too, which I'm usually really, really good at Wordle. So it's been rough.
Yeah, you talking about it made me go back and, start playing all those. And I started going back to the Wordle. And I was like, I feel like I had, similar to there's a very clear pathway of I know the 3 words that I'm starting with every single time.
Yeah.
And then they got to the point where I don't want to min-max Wordle.
Yeah.
But
So for me, the way that I don't do that is if I get a correct letter, I have to keep it there.
Okay.
So I don't let myself try different words just to figure out which letters are in there.
15 different letters in your
Yeah.
first 3 words. Yeah.
That was actually like a rule you could turn on at one point in Wordle.
Oh.
So you could actually, where the letters were locked in and you couldn't move them around or anything, try different words. It was like a hardcore mode at one point. And that was before New York Times bought them and they implemented that.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's still in there or not.
It might be. I've never looked.
I don't know. There's another version of it. I forget what it's called, but it's basically Wordle, but you have to reverse engineer it. So it gives you the final word and then you have to accurately put in words that somebody might have guessed to get to this point. So it's the line above it, it shows you here's 2 green letters, so the word has to have those 2, and then here's a yellow one or whatever. So you have to but then if a letter is wrong, you can't use it again. And so it's an interesting also sort of variation of it. If I can find the name of it, I'll show it to you because I think it's hard.
Yeah. Sounds hard.
Yeah.
The craziest one I ever saw was one where you were guessing words by how semantically close they were to
I remember that
one
one.
another. Yeah, because I think I sent it to all of you at the time. And it would be so you'd start off guessing bird, and you'd get a score, and it would tell you oh, you have a 2 out of 100. And so then you're okay, cat. And it would be oh, you went up to a 7, and you're okay, so cat is closer to the final word. So what do I associate with cat? Yarn, dog, scratch, all this sort of stuff. And you had to figure it out that way. And that game was so hard. That game just melted your brain playing it.
I think I saw that one. I
Semantical might have been the name
think that
of it.
sounds right. Yeah. All the Wordle variations that came out. I had shown Alicia. There was one called Squirtle, where it was just guessing Pokemon, and so it was
I thought it was going to be Squirtle is the answer every time.
that would also be very funny. But it was just so you guess a Pokemon and it'd be the type, so it'd give you the 5 categories were the generation, if you had that right, the first and the second typing, the height and the weight. And it was the first 3, I was okay, I can do something. And then the height and the weight, I have no idea.
I have no idea how tall Pikachu is.
The other
He's
one,
as tall as Mario in Super Smash Brothers.
and then the other one that I think is also really good. Sorry, OJ, to completely take over your conversation again. Was called Myrtle, and it was basically a whodunit type of thing. So you got this list of clues of basically the game Clue. It was Mr. Green was not in the kitchen, or so you have this crossboard that you're checking off. To ultimately.
Those are just those logic puzzles.
That's all it really was, but it was fun.
Those logic puzzles, we used to have to do those in school, and it was the one thing where you were actually, I'm enjoying this. Don't let the teacher know. Okay, again, sorry, OJ.
That's okay. There's also one where it was 8. Well, there was a 4 and then 8 words at once that you were trying to figure out.
Yeah.
That was very difficult too, because you got more than 5 chances with it, but it was low, 7 or 8 chances or something, and 8 words. So it was So like you put in the one word and it would fill all of them in and tell you with all of them.
Yes.
Yeah. So that one was rough. Yeah. So that's all I have for this week.
Okay. Let's see. So I haven't really played anything new other than Super Mario Brothers Wonder, which I talked about last week. I played more of this. This is a game that's sort of difficult to talk about without spoiling it because the spoilers of this game are not the story. It is literally the gameplay is the spoilers of it. And so like when you talk about spoiling something, it's the Wonder Seed effects. That is spoiling this game. If you tell somebody, here's all the Wonder effects, you have ruined a huge part of the fun and joy and surprise of this game. So I want to be really careful not to talk about those. In case somebody did not hear last week, so the Wonder Seeds, just real quick, and these are very early things that happen, so I don't think I'm spoiling too much. In each level, there is a Wonder Seed. If you collect that Wonder Seed, it is going to transform the level in some way. And so the very first level, the one that they've shown in all the trailers and everything, you collect the Wonder Seed, and the pipes sort of come alive like snakes or worms, and they start crawling across the level and everything. And then there's additional ones where like there will be a rush of bulls and everything that come running through the level, and you run along the top of them like in Sunset Riders. And I am sharing those two because those are the first two levels, and those are in the trailers. And so I don't feel like I'm spoiling too much. I would say if you're interested in playing this game, don't watch a lot of those because those go in like wild, interesting places that you don't expect a Mario game to play with. And that fundamentally change the way that you're playing the game. And that's really cool because that's really adventurous of Nintendo to do that with Mario. And I think, last week we talked about New Super Mario Brothers as a series. This is what makes it so different, right? Like we talked about that series being very sterile and everything. And part of that has to do with the presentation, the graphics and the animation and the sound. But part of it is this, right? Like what the great Mario games have always had is that level of experimentation, right? So we get Super Mario Brothers 1, and then we get Super Mario Brothers 2 in the US at least, which is this wildly different game. And then we get part 3, which kind of goes back to the style of the first game, but the levels are wildly different. You have World 7 where everything's gigantic, and you get the Tanuki suit that lets you fly and everything. And then you get Super Mario World where you have this overworld map, and you have the secret exits to levels, and you get the you get the flying suit, and you get the Star World for the first time, all this sort of stuff. And then, you get Mario 64, and each game is just like playing with how you play the game. And if there was anything wrong with the new Super Mario Brothers series, it was they made 4 games in that, and they all played exactly alike, right? Like there was some experimentation there with some of the levels, but it really felt kind of stale by the end of that series. Even though those weren't bad games, New Super Mario Brothers U is a pretty decent game, but it felt very stale. This feels as sort of experimental and playful with the mechanics as Mario Odyssey did, right? And like the first time I played Mario Odyssey, and you're like, you see the T-Rex, and you're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I could throw my hat on the T-Rex? And then you do, and it lets you. And you're like stomping around a level as a T-Rex, and you're like, this is cool. How cool is Mario, and that the fact that they're doing this with a game. This feels like that in a 2D game, and so that's really like the thing to spoil in this game. So I don't want to talk too much about that, other than to say. That inventiveness, that cleverness, like you see it in the first few levels, and then you think, okay, like to go back when they showed trailers for this, I kept thinking there's going to be like 5 or 6 of these wonder effects, right? Because they just showed a few of them. And so you were like, okay, well, there'll be, a few of these, and then you're going to have a few new, suits that you get. So, they showed that with the bubble suit and the elephant suit and all that. And I thought, okay, well, that's clever. That's new and different. That'll be fun. No. Every single level, there's something new with the Wonder Seed.
That's really cool.
And that inventiveness, that cleverness, just it keeps up. And I would say it even, as you progress, in some ways ramps up. But then there's other things that they do that's really crazy in this game where you're like, this is not what I expected them to do. So there's a level not too long into the game, and I'm not going to describe it in detail, but you go down a pipe and you go into the sub level and everything, and you're running around and you see a coin on the other side of this pipe. There's no way for you to reach it. And you're kind of like, well, there's a hole in the ceiling there. So there's got to be a way that I can get up on top and fall down into this hole and everything. And you're running around and you're looking for some sort of secret block or something that you need to hit. And you just cannot figure it out. I could not figure it out. And then so you go back up into the overworld and you're running along and you're like, oh, here's another pipe. And there's a big hole right next to it. Mm-hmm. So I have to fall down in that hole from the overworld to fall into the underworld to get where that coin is. So, I haven't seen Mario do something like that since Super Mario Brothers 2. And, if you remember Super Mario Brothers 2, there's that level where you start off on a waterfall and you have to fall down the waterfall into the pit. And then, so the way we originally discovered this, I think I've talked about this on this podcast before, but the way we originally discovered this is my cousin and me were playing it, and we had to go somewhere, and my sister was standing there, and she didn't really play a whole lot. She was a little older than us, and we said, oh, we have to quit, and we said, here, do you want to play? And she said, I'm just going to kill you. And she jumped down the hole, and we were like, holy cow. No, we've got to play now. You just found this huge new secret. And that sort of discovery, right? I talk about that when I teach video games, I talk about that moment of discovery and how cool that was in a game and how that makes you rethink the way that you play video games. And this game is doing that.
Cool. And
that's not what I expected from a 2D Mario game in 2023. The new Super Mario Brothers games had kind of beat that out of me, and thinking that we might see that. So that's incredibly cool that they're doing stuff like that, and the fact that they made a new 2D Mario game that is both surprising me all the way through playing it, but also bringing those little moments of joy where you go, that's amazing. That makes me happy that they did that. And Mario Odyssey, I picked as my game of the year that year over Zelda, Breath of the Wild. And maybe not the most popular choice to do that. But one of the reasons I really love that Mario Odyssey game is all the way through that game, there are those moments of joy where, the most famous one is where you're in New Donk City and they're having the music festival and everything. And when you get to that point in the game, at least for me, I was just like, this is the best thing ever. Way to go, Nintendo. You all your screw ups are okay now. You have wiped your slate clean because this is such a great moment. It brings such pure joy to me. And I would say also the very end of that game on the moon, and I won't spoil that, but there are parts of that that just bring pure joy to me, and I'm like, this is great, Nintendo. You're really having fun with this, and that's the way this game feels. And it elicits that same sort of response, and I'm just like, I knew this game would be good. It's a Nintendo Mario game. Even the new Super Mario Bros. Games are good. This game has shocked me with how good it is. And that seems crazy to think that Nintendo could shock you still with a Mario game. But just to put this in a little broader context, I shouldn't be shocked because they just did this like 4 months ago with Zelda, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, we're making a Zelda that's going to be set in the exact same world. And yeah, we're going to have like a gimmick in here. And then you play that game and you're like, oh my God, like this is like so much more than I ever expected. And there's constant moments of surprise and joy that game brought to me playing it. And they've done it again with this. And, you know, it's kind of funny. The Switch, its first year, launched with Zelda and Mario. And here we are in what most people expect to be its final full year. You know, Switch 2 coming out sometime next year, probably next fall sometime. And they've done it again with a new Mario and Zelda. And they're both fantastic, and they're both not what you expected. Like, nobody expected Zelda to have, nuts and bolts comparisons to it, right? Where you're building a go-kart in a Zelda game. Like, nobody expected that. And here they've done it with a 2D Zelda game where nobody expected them to make the best 2D Mario game since Super Mario World. And that's just such an amazing achievement to think about. And again, even more to the point, what are we, year 7, year 8 of the Switch? And here they are making not just 2 great games, but arguably 2 of the best games that they have ever made in their entire lifespan as a company. And the other thing I think there's an interesting comparison here to what Nintendo did with the NES. On the NES, we got Zelda 1 and Mario 1. Then they made Zelda 2 and Mario 2, and they're just these wild sort of divergence from that original formula. And they kind of did that here with these, right? Like, we're going to follow up one of the best Mario games ever with a very different style of Mario game, but it's going to be equally as like great. And we're going to take, not just one of the best Zelda games ever, but what many people argue is one of the best video games ever made, period. And we're going to innovate on that in a way that just makes you go, this is not what I expected of a Zelda game.
It's somehow even better.
Yeah. And to see Nintendo being that creative and playing with their major franchises in that way, with that level of confidence, right? Because as a big company, that's kind of got to be scary. Like, this is your bread and butter. This is the game that you can be sure is going to sell 10 million plus copies. They're not doing this with Pokemon, right? And like even Alicia will say that's been kind of part of the problem with Pokemon, right? Like, they're not innovating in the same rate as they have in the past. They're doing that with Mario and Zelda, and like, bravo to Nintendo. In a year that may be the best year in history for video games, Nintendo may be having the best year of all, and that's amazing to say.
Yeah.
Especially, 7-8 years into the lifespan of the Switch.
Sure.
So I've been watching a lot of people playing, and I think what I've seen I've enjoyed so much that I think I'm gonna go without eating for a little bit to buy the game because I don't have the money for it, but I really want to play it. But the thing is too is that it's not an easy game. Like, you can pick it up and play, and they have the easy mode with the Yoshis and the Norbit, is it? I think
Nabbit.
Yeah. But there's challenging parts to it, and I keep on seeing people get stuck on the same challenges on the same levels too. And so I haven't seen that many levels because people that I'm watching are getting stuck on the same thing. Even like really seasoned Mario gamers are getting stuck on the same. Oh, I don't want to say stuck, but like they're having a challenge. It's not like they're walking through the game easy. And I appreciate that too, and that you can alleviate that if you play other characters. Like, you have a choice to do that. So that's something that I don't know if there's like a badge or anything for not using Yoshis or the Nabbit, but like I like knowing that, hey, I just can't get past this level, but I'm just gonna pick a Yoshi or a Nabbit and get through it.
They've done that in some of the recent games with like the golden P-wings, which basically allow you to fly over the entire level. And like, I know this is the sort of thing that people online lose their minds over, and they're like, get good. But like, these are games designed for families to play, right? Like, and a Mario game should not be so hard that people are giving up in frustration. Like, what is the value in that?
Right.
Like, because then you're not seeing those later levels. You're not getting to see like the other Wonder Seeds. Like, I'm fine with it being challenging. I would say so far it's been, again, as somebody who's played a lot of video games, and it's certainly not as good as I was when I was like 12 playing video games. So far, it hasn't been super difficult, but there are different levels of challenges for different levels. They are ranked, so you get like 1 to 5 star ratings for levels, telling you like how difficult it is. And I would say, there's certainly differing levels of challenge to some of those levels, and you can skip a lot of the levels. So at least to get through to the end of the game, you do not have to play every single level.
Right.
You have to collect these Wonder Seeds that you're collecting through the levels, and you are getting more than enough of those just playing through the sort of mainline levels. Like, I always have more than enough when I get to the checkpoints to get past them. I think you're right, though, that it's not a complete cakewalk. And I think Nintendo has been guilty of that at times with some of their games and making them too easy. Yeah. And the level of challenge that you expect in a sort of old school Mario game is there. But those old school Mario games were also, like most people could at least get to the end of Super Mario Brothers, even if they couldn't beat it, right? Yeah. Mario 2, Mario 3, you might struggle in the last world, but like you could at least get there for most people. And I think this game's the same way. Yeah. People aren't going to struggle to get to the end, but they might struggle there at the end with some of the challenge. And I think that's fine. That's keeping with what these games have always been. So yes, enthusiastic thumbs up to Super Mario Brothers Wonder. I'm not done with it yet, and that's mostly because I just haven't had time. But like, I am really loving this game quite a bit, and I had expected to start Spider-Man 2 this week, and Mario Wonder has kept me away from it.
It is wild how many Game of the Year style games have come out, or like games that are of that quality. It seems like, it's not just, these are big releases, but it's like, it's been a lot of big releases, and not many of them have really flopped. You sometimes you have the big release and it ends up like not coming together. I'm sure there have been that, but like the highly, highly anticipated ones, I can't really think of one that has really been.
Gollum?
Yeah, but I mean, like, okay, sure. But
maybe Starfield, but like, I think for the people who really like Starfield, they really like it quite a bit. Yeah, so, no, I mean, you're absolutely right, because we got Mario and Spider-Man last week. We're getting Alan Wake 2 this week, and that was a game that I think a lot of people were unsure of, and the early reviews of that have been 5 out of 5s, 10s, like very high ratings.
That's what I was just about to say. From everything I've seen, Alan Wake 2 is another one of those like legit contenders. And I mean, we I don't know if it was last week or 2 weeks ago, Alicia was like, what even came out in January? And you're talking about Hi-Fi Rush. And it's just like, there are a lot of those like second or third tier games that have been just as good. I know there are people who legit feel like Lies of P should be Game of the Year.
Yeah.
I've
heard that as well.
Yeah. And so it's just like, these games that seemingly came out of nowhere as well. It's not just the ones that we've been waiting for, like Tears of the Kingdom. We've been waiting on that one for years, or people have been waiting on Starfield for years. It's games that like nobody had any idea these were even going to come until they came.
So I'm wondering if the pandemic might have had something to do with that, because a lot of people, there wasn't a whole lot they could do except for like just sit home and think of awesome game ideas and awesome game mechanics to put in. So maybe not the big AAA games, because those were probably in development way beforehand, but some of the smaller games too, the smaller companies who can put them together faster.
Yeah, and I mean, I hope, I say this as a good thing. Hopefully it just also gave more time for people to like really like sit and master these things. I know before like every single direct there was the COVID sort of statement of like due to the pandemic, you know, some of these games may get delayed or games that you've seen, you know, dates might not be accurate. And it's like, you know, I know that again, the game industry has not been known for treating its workers very well, but you know, I hope that it gave that time for like some of those ideas to marinate and for them to like really give it like a nuanced look over.
I think we've talked about this or at least briefly touched on it before, but yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that you see this year particularly is a lot of games that have had that extra time, right? Like we know that Zelda, they have come out and publicly stated Zelda was done last year. And they basically used an extra year to polish that game up. And it shows.
Yeah.
Right? That game could have been a buggy mess with like the mechanics that are in it.
Sure.
And the fact that it's not, right, as much of a mess as it should be. Because when you play that game, you're like, this should be breaking left and right. As particularly running on a Switch.
Sure.
Right.
And it doesn't is a real testament to like how much that extra time benefited that game. And it feels like a super polished game in a way that a lot of games in recent memory haven't, you know, not necessarily from Nintendo, but from, you know, generally publishers. But like, it's not just Nintendo, it's Baldur's Gate 3, right? Like that's a game that spent several years in early access and, you know, and it comes out and nobody was expecting that game to be a Game of the Year contender, I don't think. You know, like Baldur's Gate fans were excited about it, but nobody was expecting that game to go as mainstream as it has. Liza P, right? That's a game that had a really cool trailer. And I think most people thought, well, it's got a cool trailer, and then it's going to be a Dark Souls knockoff, and
It's got a goofy story or goofy sort of concept. Yeah.
No, Pinocchio, not Goofy.
Sure, true.
But you know, and I don't think a lot of people expect it. And that game is actually kind of flying under the radar.
Sure.
And because people just don't have time. Yeah. You know, like I haven't played that game yet because I just don't have the time for it.
And same thing, I think it was maybe last week or 2 weeks ago. Well, it was whenever Christina was on talking about Diablo 4, and I know you had mentioned it, like, I feel like I haven't really heard much about it since it came out, you know, and it's just like, and Diablo is one of those like high-end franchises. Again, people have been waiting a long time for Diablo 4. And I think you see it on the other side of games that don't have that time. I know it was earlier this week. I saw that whatever the name of the game, Skull Island, Rise of Kong developer said they only had a year.
Right.
That's all they had was a year. And like, I don't know what it takes to make a video game, but like to even make that in a year, like that seems like an achievement, even if the game isn't good. Like
games aren't made in a year anymore.
Yeah. It's like to even just get it to that point.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it is very, I think it's an exciting time to be a fan of playing games or just a fan of watching games. I mean, yeah.
I think you bring up an interesting point about headed into Game of the Year, right? Like which games are going to make that short list as nominations, as consideration for Game of the Year. And, you know, I think we talked about this last year when we were putting together our top 10 list and our individual list and all that and going through that. But I think this has been a conversation going on in the game industry for a while. What is the value of Game of the Year, right? Like naming Zelda or Spider-Man Game of the Year is cool, right? Like it's that sort of acknowledgement of achievement and everything. That's cool. But once you get past that game, does it really help to name Mario Wonder, you know, like your number 5 game of the year? Or is it much more useful to name Liza P or Hi-Fi Rush, like one of these lesser known games, and like maybe using that as an opportunity to spotlight those games? Because back in January, when I was playing Hi-Fi Rush, I was like, this is on my top 10 of the year list. Like this game is that good and I'm enjoying it that much. And now we're in the end of October and I'm looking and going, I don't know if Hi-Fi Rush makes my top 10 of the year.
Yeah.
And not because it's a bad game, just because there's that many good games that have come out this year. And I don't know if it has just been squeezed off of that list. You know, that's not a problem we've had in the last few years, really. But you're right. Like every game coming out being a banger, right? Like Street Fighter 6 and Mortal Kombat 1. Both of those games probably aren't going to make top 10 of the year list. So then it becomes, which one do you pick?
Yeah.
Right? Because like those are two fantastic fighting games. Like I haven't played Mortal Kombat 1, but everyone who has, you know, praised it for the most part. And, you know, Liza P, where does that fit in? Diablo 4, do you cut Diablo 4 in favor of Baldur's Gate 3 because like you only want to have one like computer role-playing game on that list?
Yeah, and you know, I think compared to last year, where last year it felt like it's either going to be God of War or Elden Ring that is just going to dominate, and understandably, I mean, both of those were phenomenal games, like feats in the industry. But then I think, you know, 2 years ago, you know, and take what you will of like the actual like Jeff Keighley's Game Awards thing, but like It Takes Two winning Game of the Year over, I don't know what else was nominated, but like over a number of different things that like, that to me, and I think this is sort of what you're getting at, is a lot more exciting. You know, it would be a lot more exciting to see Lies of P win Game of the Year or Hi-Fi Rush win Game of the Year. I know probably neither of those are going to happen, but like to see something like that win it is it's exciting. I remember I think it was 2018, and 2018 was another one of those stacked years for games. But even just to see like Celeste get nominated as Game of the Year, deservedly so.
And that mattered a lot to that game. That put a spotlight on that game for a whole lot of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and I think one of the things when we look at the biggest games that's different this year is it's a lot of big AAA games that are hitting, right? Like it is your Nintendo properties. Like there's so many big Nintendo properties hitting this year that Pikmin 4 is getting kind of lost in the shuffle. And that's an extremely good game this year. And, you know, in past years, something like the Resident Evil remake might have made top 10 lists. You know, it's hard to put that game on the top 10 over something like Liza P. That's this original new property.
It's wild to think that the Resident Evil 4 remake came out this year. Like that's just another game that came out this year.
Yeah, I mean, and so like I think, you know, you start to think about what's going to be at the top of top 10 lists this year. And last year, you know, I had several small indie games in my top 10. You know, there was things like Stray, but also like Arcade Paradise and like these other games. You know, Vampire Survivors was our number one game of the year last year. But like in a year like this one, even if Vampire Survivors came out this year, can it compete with AAA Spider-Man 2, AAA Mario Wonder, AAA, you know, like these big games hitting?
Well, and I think the one that we've talked about most, I still have not played it, you know, and I don't know if it's quite that level, but like, where would you put Sea of Stars? Like, it, you know, is that cracking a top 10? Is it like a top 15, top 20? I mean, I don't know what on like a scale of 1 to 10 you would give that game, but I mean,
I mean, last year I think that game would have. Like I think last year we would have been on, you know, our Game of the Year podcast arguing for that game to be ranked very high.
100%, yeah.
I mean, I think it holds a similar place to Stray. And last year, OJ and I were both arguing for Stray quite a bit. And I mean, I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but like that's a really, you know, kind of fun, unique experience as a game. And I think it deserves that spot. But yeah, looking at Sea of Stars, like that's a really cool game. There's something special about that game. But yeah, I mean, in a year where it's going up against Baldur's Gate 3 and Diablo 4 and all these games, and I keep saying their names over and over again because I think people need to understand like how deep that roster is this year. Like, I mean, I think just the number of games we've mentioned here, we've already exceeded 10, and we're not to the end of the year yet. Yeah. And, you know, that's not even talking about some of these like smaller indie games.
Yeah. And then we talked a little bit about the RE4 remake, but, you know, you've got Super Mario RPG coming up here in just a couple of weeks. And, you know, there's all those remakes or re-releases that are, you know,
Metroid
Nintendo.
Prime.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
There's that System Shock remake that they did that's like exceptional from everything I've seen about that. I need to play that before the end of the year. But that's like one of those games that falls on the back burner, right? Like, because you're like, well, I've seen System Shock before, like, and that looks really cool, but I don't know that I need to like be, you know, champion that game in this year.
I don't remember if they gave an announcement. I highly doubt it's this year. Did they give a date for the 1,000 Year Door remake? Is that next year sometime? I assume it is, but
I don't know that they've announced a day for that one yet. I think they've just announced it's coming.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is a fantastic year for video games. I mean, I think that's the overall message from this. And, you know, certainly the big AAA games are hitting really big, but also the indie games, as you know, things like Sea of Stars are also hitting really big this year. And, you know, I think that's, yes, video game studios staffed up during the pandemic, so that's when we're getting a lot of these. But I think also video game developers have learned that spending a little extra time pays off.
Redfall. There's the game that flopped.
Well, I mean, I think an argument could be made that Microsoft has largely flopped this year. Redfall, Starfield was not the, you know, it did not capture the zeitgeist like they have in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I think people were expecting, similar to if we talk last year was God of War and Elden Ring. I think people were thinking this year's going to be Tears of the Kingdom and Starfield. And I mean, I'm more of a Nintendo person anyway, so maybe it's the people that I follow are also more Nintendo people, but I don't feel like Starfield reached anywhere near the common discourse of just like all these Twitter posts or people playing it on Twitch or YouTube and all that sort of stuff the way that people were playing Zelda. So yeah, I think it's fair. Not a bad game by any means, but didn't hit the same way that people were expecting or maybe Microsoft was expecting.
So I'm gonna get Zen here and say this year maybe instead of Game of the Year we should have Year of the Game. Sorry, that popped up in my head early and I was holding it on until the end, and so I apologize for that. Send your hate mail to justin.young@sau.edu.
Thank you. I appreciate receiving that hate mail. OJ said that, not Justin.
It's just the emails. You're like, that was a little cringe, and that's it. Nothing else.
A little, come on. You're not
I actually received an email about the podcast, like
What?
like an hour or two ago.
The hate mail's finally coming. We've made it. We've made it.
It's not actually hate mail. It was a thumbs up. It was a friend of mine from high school and college. I saw him maybe like a month ago. And we were talking, and it came up that I did this podcast, and he was like, "You do a podcast?" And he was like, instantly downloaded it on his phone, and I was like, "Yeah," and I didn't think too much of it. And then he emailed me the next day. And he's like, "I listened to the first 2 episodes," and so then he emailed me today. And was like, "I'm through episode 10 now," and I'm like, "He's listening to the entire archive history, and he's going through it much faster than we're making new episodes."
That's awesome.
So maybe he'll get slowed a little when he gets to Game of the Year because those were very long episodes. But yeah, I mean, I think it is a very good year for video games. That's very exciting. I think, yeah, when you talk about like which games are kind of getting lost in the shuffle, I think that's going to be really interesting to look at the end of the year. I feel like this year, more than some in more recent memory, there's going to be a reevaluation at some point where people are going to go back this and look at this year and say, here's this game that came out that nobody talked about or very few people talked about because it got lost in the shuffle. Like, can you imagine like being Not that I think this game is going to get a positive reevaluation, but can you imagine being Sonic Superstars releasing last week?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you released the same week as like one of the best Mario games ever, as Spider-Man 2, a week out from Alan Wake 2. Like, poor Sonic.
Yeah.
So
Sonic was set up to fail.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's that we've talked about it before, but there's that Disney game, Illusion Island, that a lot of people have said very positive things about. You can play 4 players on the same game at the same time, and that's sort of a little bit of a Metroidvania without combat. But like that's a game I haven't even played yet.
Yeah, and it's also the game that got looked over in our entire conversation. It's the one that got looked over last week when we talked about it. Hogwarts Legacy came out this year as well. And it's just like, that's another game that, like, regardless of how you feel about, rolling, that's a game that people were very excited and were highly anticipating.
That game's one of the best-selling games of the year.
Yeah.
Right? And yeah, there's that baggage along with it. But yeah, like in any other year, we'd be talking about that game right now. And I feel like that game is not getting talked about at all at this point.
Well, I think I wouldn't say it was a flop, but I don't think people got everything out of it that they wanted either. The people that I know who have played it were like, yeah, I played it for a little bit, and then I just kind of stopped. It wasn't super good. It wasn't like a bad game, but it wasn't good. But I think a lot of nostalgia fueled the sales of that game.
Sure.
Sure.
Absolutely. Or at least the intrigue of it.
Yeah,
especially for, millennials and who grew up reading those books. Yeah.
Yeah, we say I'm the same age as Harry Potter, so it framed a lot of my teens, late teens, I guess.
Yeah. So, I think that's going to be very difficult as we get to the end of the year, thinking about, okay, what all came out? What do I have time left to actually devote some time to, actually play?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, not to change it up completely, that in and of itself would be like an interesting episode just to like go through the list of here's everything that came out this year.
Yeah.
Even if it was just the like big AAA games, here's everything that came out.
Yeah.
Well, Game of the Year will get an opportunity to do some of that. Like, hey, we've left out one of the best things that came out this year, the making of Karateka. Like that, in any other year, that's probably on my top 10. I don't know what I'm going to do with that game. It's probably, I don't know if that makes my top 10. So anyways, let's move on to news because we could talk about this forever.
Yeah.
We were talking, there's only 3 of us. This will be a shorter episode.
And we're still on What Are You Playing?
Yeah.
Now we're
So anyways, Justin, you've been playing anything on Super Mario Bros. Wonder?
Actually have not, other than the conversation we had about Marvel Snap.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to news. This is really kind of interesting. So Arkham Knight all of a sudden got an update with a new suit for Batman. Arkham Knight is an 8-year-old game, and all of a sudden they got a new suit for the Batman. So this is the Robert Pattinson movie. It's his suit from that movie. So as a skin that you can add. This is an official update. It is in the game as like free content within the game and everything. This isn't like a hack or a mod or something. This debuted on the Epic Games Store, and then they removed it. And there's been no public comment about it. So what people have speculated is that the game was supposed to come out this week on the Switch. They're doing that compilation, the trilogy compilation on the Switch, and that they were adding this to that. That compilation got delayed until next year, I believe. And somebody thinks that they did not tell the Epic game version not to release that content. So, but even at that, right? Like putting this out on the Switch after 8 years and you're adding extra content to it is like really kind of wild to think about.
Sure.
And this isn't a game like you would continue play. Like you play it once or twice, you go through it and you're done, right? Okay.
There's not really a multiplayer component or anything where you're wanting to show off the cool outfits that you have or something. But I mean, I guess I will say that the original Spider-Man game did continue to get DLC suits that were free after its release, right? Even though it doesn't really have a multiplayer component either. But not 8 years after its release. Let's see. Ubisoft has delayed a quote-unquote large game till next fiscal year. So that's after March 2024. Many think this is probably Star Wars Outlaws, though there's no official statement. That doesn't surprise me that game would get a delay.
Yeah, and I think what we just talked about, delays are not always a bad thing if it gives more time to, like I said, really shape this game what it needs to be.
Yeah, always remember Miyamoto's advice that it's better to have a late game than a bad game.
Yeah.
Let's see. Former PlayStation executive Sean Layden has said it's, quote, criminal that the industry isn't doing more to preserve games. He says the industry has a, quote, obligation and responsibility. We talk on here quite a bit about game preservation. It's a particular interest of mine. But I think this is interesting. Certainly we've heard Microsoft come out and make some comments about this, Phil Spencer as the head of Xbox. And now we're getting a former high-level executive at PlayStation saying the same thing, that the game industry needs to do more to make sure that its history, its legacy is being preserved and made available. And that they're failing at it in large part right now. So this kind of goes back to the study that the Video Game History Foundation put out, where over 80% of games 10 years or older are non-commercially available anymore. I think the game industry has to address this, and it needs to be a game industry, move. Like this needs to be at the level of the ESA to say, hey, we're coming up with a plan to make these games more available long term. And that might be through working with the Video Game History Foundation, working with libraries to make that available, but there needs to be something there so that, a lot of this history doesn't potentially just disappear forever.
And when I'm thinking about this, I think about movies. If you old movie sets have a bunch of old props and stuff from the old movies, they have stories, and then they have the old masters of the films that they can, it was in Betamax and VHS, and then it was on DVD, then it was on Blu-ray, and now it's streaming, right? I'm not going to say it would be easy. You can't just snap your fingers and it's done. But something like that for video games where you have a master that can then be switched to newer technology if needed too, just to make sure that the games are available. And then the history of it, the videos, take videos of people, keep people's journals and stuff. Well, not necessarily your journals, but people writing about the stuff.
Like dev diaries.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing.
And it's so easy to keep those. They take up space, obviously, but it's so easy to keep those and just make them available. And other media types are doing it, and I do think it is criminal that they're not doing it.
Yeah, and I feel like we've talked about this before, and how whether or not games move to more digital only releases. I know we talked about Alan Wake, right? Is not going to have a physical release.
It wasn't. I sort of wonder if they rethink that after the success it seems to be having.
That is true. But I guess to use it as an example still, those games that are digital only.
Sure.
What happens when, what is it? The 3DS and the Wii U stores are going down sometime in April of next year or something like that, right?
Yep.
What happens to, if there are digital only games, are those just they cease to exist now? And so I think that's, it'll be interesting to see how digital only releases play a role in that, or what if there is an answer to the preservation of those types of digital only releases.
Yeah, and I think the 3DS is an interesting example, right? Because there's a very specific technical limitation to the preservation of those games. So even if you preserve the digital files for a 3DS game, the hardware to play that, right? Having a dual screen portable system that does 3D, that's not quite the same as an NES game, which I can run on anything that has a screen, right? It's certainly super challenging, but I think the game industry owes it to the consumer. It owes it to themselves.
Yeah.
Long term to do something with this because, OJ, you're right. Like the fact that, I can watch almost any movie I want. Now there are exceptions, right? And I understand that, but almost any movie I want to watch, I can find online available now, right? And commercially to like go buy. Like now there's some very old movies and things with rights that have clogged up a few movies, but I can probably find that available. The same is not at all true of a lot of classic video games. If I want to go play the NES version of Ghostbusters, I have to pirate that game. And, thank goodness that there are emulators, being written and updated and, developed for that. Because otherwise, like a lot of that would be gone and lost.
And it's particularly important thinking about like, we live in an era of the remaster or the re-released game, but that game or Pinocchio last week that I had played, like those are not games that are going to be remastered or re-released, or at least I don't expect them to be compared to,
There's the Gargoyles re-release,
Sure,
but that's the exception more than the rule, right?
It's like the Marios, it's probably longer than people would have anticipated, but like, it's not surprising that SMRPG is getting a re-release or, a game that we'll be talking about here in just a minute, potentially getting remade or re-released and stuff like that.
Yeah, but even something like Super Mario RPG, like part of the issue there was the rights issue between Nintendo and Square, right? Like the tie up with that. And so that's where a lot of these games find themselves. And so it ends up not making financial sense unless you are the size of Nintendo with the money to like probably throw around and however they dealt with Square with this. But like Nintendo has the money and there's the incentive with a game like Super Mario RPG to make that get done. But that doesn't exist for a lot of games.
Yeah.
Right? Even Pinocchio has a better shot because it's a licensed Disney game.
Sure.
Right? And you have the Disney adults who will buy anything.
Yeah. And they did it for The Lion King and Aladdin.
Right.
Yeah.
But like, again, those are the exception that kind of proves the rule because those things that aren't Disney aren't necessarily getting those sorts of remakes. The Home Alone game is not getting re-released.
Sure.
The Home Improvement game is not getting re-released.
And it's a shame for humanity that's not re-released.
But I mean, yes, I'm not going to go out and spend $10 to buy the Home Improvement game, but I also feel like that game needs to be preserved and available because there is always something of value there for people to go back to. Certainly, we know as researchers that like being able to access these things is infinitely valuable if you're going to be doing research on video games. Or even how people, play and interact with them or talk about them. All right, moving along. We are so determined to get this to be longer than last week's with Alicia. Let's see, Squadron 42. This is the single player component to Star Citizen. They have announced that it is feature complete. So, in other words, all the features within the game are in there. You can play this game from start to finish. At this point, they are, optimizing and polishing the game and all of that, potentially working on graphics and sound, and all those sorts of issues, squashing bugs. It's feature complete. That means Squadron 42 might actually release. We may actually get an official release of something related to Star Citizen. Star Citizen, by the way, this is not Star Citizen. This is just Squadron 42, which is a component of Star Citizen. Star Citizen, as of now, has brought in over $600 million. $600 million, and they have not released anything. They have not released a full game of any form. There's a beta you can play, but like $600 million. What are people doing? What is going on? People, what are you doing with your money?
Yeah.
There's got to be better ways to spend your money. Then, like, I don't even mind that you're spending it on space video games, but like, spend it on a space video game you can actually play.
Yeah.
Oh, let's see. There's a rumor out. This comes from comicbook.com and a leaker by the name of Zippo. And so they gave some credibility to Zippo. So I'm going to assume Zippo has some track record of credibility here, that Nintendo is considering remaking Super Mario Brothers 3. This, other than the Super Mario All-Stars releases, this would be the first like remake of a Mario game that I can think of, a mainline, this style of Mario game. Obviously, they have done this with the Zelda games, so we did get the HD versions of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. We got the complete remake of Link's Awakening. So it's not like Nintendo hasn't done this before and might not have some interest in this, but it's kind of surprising to see this. And, kind of surprising to start with Mario 3, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I feel like I would rather see, if they were going to do one of those 2D Marios, I would rather see it happen to like Super Mario Land from the Game Boy. That's one where you gave it some different graphics or updated graphics. That's one of those weird Mario games where like the enemy, there's like, I don't know if they're enemies they ever show up anywhere else in the Mario universe other than that game.
You don't remember battling UFOs in the other Mario games?
Yeah, that dude that like throws the top half of his body at you. And,
the Sphinx.
So yeah, it's an interesting decision. It would be a bold decision, I think, as well in many ways. Yeah.
I hope if they do this, that they have some fun with it. Like I don't need Mario 3 with Mario Wonder graphics. So like, I think if you're going to do this, you have to do something that really plays with it in some way that makes it interesting, because, that game doesn't look bad, right? So like, why are you spending the time and energy to do this? So like, I almost wish they would do something like a very sort of hand-painted style, or, really kind of play with the visual style of the game if you're going to go back and do this with it. But yeah, I mean, I'm always, Mario 3 is a very, very good game.
Yeah, I love it. I have a really good memory from this game. So, let me finish before you realize why it's a really good memory.
Oh no, it's an OJ story.
Yeah, it is. So
somebody is going to end up maimed or
emotionally scarred for life.
Yeah. So I was an annoying and weird kid. I'm not gonna lie. And so this game came out, and I had a quote unquote friend, but it was just a bunch of kids around my age, and we all lived around each other essentially. And so he had rented Super Mario Brothers 3, and I went over there, and he was letting everyone else play a little bit, and he wouldn't let me play. So I went home, and I was really upset, and my dad was there. And we were super poor, so I really didn't own very many video games. But my dad took me to the mall to go buy Super Mario Brothers 3. And so I owned the game, and then he told me to invite all the other kids over, and he wouldn't let them play, and I could just sit there and play because I owned it. So that was why it was a good memory, because it's my dad was super petty, and I loved it. But also, I saw a news thing, or not a news thing, but a little story about Super Mario Brothers 3 that said they went into the code and they realized that the slot machines in the little mushroom houses,
right,
the roulette.
You sent that video out.
Yeah, it's rigged. And so the amount of time that it takes to slow down and stop is different between every time you press the button. So it's rigged, and there's no way to like get super good at it and win. Which I always thought. I was like, I'm just so bad at this. I'm so bad at this, right? But no, it's it was rigged in the game. So if they remake it, they should fix that.
Or, I mean, was that done on purpose?
That's fair. It's fair, yeah.
So rigged in the sense of like, or like, if I'm understanding you correctly, that there's just like a random number generator sort of functioning that like, and when you press it, it stops that. It's like, oh, it's going to take 3 seconds to do it. And if you hit it a split second later, or like on a different frame, I guess would probably be the way that it does it. This time it's going to take 7 seconds. Next frame, it would have taken 4 seconds. Next frame, it would have taken 6 seconds. Is that sort of what you mean?
No, from the way that I understand it, is that it's not predetermined, but like every time the next one comes up, it's predetermined how long it will take for it to slow down, how many frames it'll take to stop. So like
The next image, like the next like third chunk?
yeah, the next third. So like I'll press the button and like 20 frames is when it'll stop, and then it determines, oh, it's going to be 24 frames next time, or it's going to be 35 frames.
Oh,
next time.
I see.
Something like that.
So it changes from encounter to encounter to encounter. I see. Okay.
So if there is a way to,
So I think
like-
you were saying the same thing. Like,
Yeah,
is a random number in there.
but I don't think like a tool assisted speed run could do it, because I don't think it's, I don't know how
There's
predetermined
not a
it is.
consistency
Yeah.
to it, at least from what
From what I
yeah,
understand,
from
yeah.
what we understand. Okay.
So
But
it's not Super Mario Brothers 2 where you can just hammer on the A button
Yeah.
and you'll always get one extra life.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, stuff like that's really interesting. Like people going back, and it's really interesting that people are spending the time today to go back and look at
Yeah.
the code of these games and figure out like, oh, when I was a kid, this was extremely frustrating because I could not like get this consistently. And like, no, I couldn't either. But like, I would never think like, well, I need to go dissect the code and figure out why that was.
Yeah.
I just figured, I wasn't good enough or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's really interesting to think about the way these games are, are made, and how sometimes that leads to the way we expect, modern versions of these games. I've talked about Celeste before, and like how, Celeste does a lot of stuff with that, like kind of cheating to help the player play a little better, and like that's really fascinating to look at. And you're like, oh, that's why that game feels so good when you're playing it. All right, Xbox had a partner showcase. This is basically, they had 30 minutes of just showing trailers for third-party games. So they showed off quite a few here, Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth, Caro Will Not Die, Still Wakes the Deep, RoboCop Rogue City, Dungeons of Hinterberg, Spirit of the North 2, Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, Manorlands, The Finals, Ark Survival Ascend, that is the remake of Ark 1, that is not Ark 2, and Alan Wake 2. I think all of this was pretty much like known quantities, so I don't think there was anything that was a new announcement among this. But it was like in some cases, like with Alan Wake 2, where we were getting like, footage, in-game footage of this being played. I think Metal Gear Solid Delta, that was the first in-game footage that we had actually seen of this. Previously, we'd just seen a trailer. So anything in here stand out to you that you were excited by or that you're interested in after seeing any of the footage from this?
Yeah, because that's a favorite series of mine, so I'm sure I'll pick up Like a Dragon for sure.
So did you watch the trailer for this?
I did not.
So the trailer for this is that there is basically an Animal Crossing mode.
I saw everybody saying Animal Crossing mode, and I had no idea what that meant.
It means that there is an Animal Crossing mode in this game.
Okay.
You can leave and go to an island, and on that island, you can build your own house, and you can go to a store and buy patterns to decorate the carpet and furniture. and then you can do tasks for other people who live on the island.
Excellent.
It is. I mean, they just flat out copied Animal Crossing, but with the Yakuza or Like a Dragon characters and everything. It is, and the thing is, like you're watching it and going, so they're making an entire Yakuza game that's like Animal Crossing, and then you go, oh no, this is just a mode within this
This
game.
is just something you can do.
Right. Like, I mean, I don't even know if you have to do anything that it's showing you. Yeah, that was maybe the craziest thing they showed off here.
Yeah, like I said, I saw everybody mentioning it on Twitter. I did not know what it meant. I didn't look into it any further, but
It means exactly what you think it means.
So just before the podcast, we were talking about like games being past their relevance of the like the property that it is, and then I'm thinking like RoboCop. That's
RoboCop is eternal.
yeah.
Okay, let me talk about this RoboCop game because I have not talked about this. I played the demo for this game. This game is so much better than you think it's going to be. This is one of those games that, like, when they showed off the initial trailer, it might have been this summer during everything. I think everybody had the same reaction, which was RoboCop. Like, you're making a new RoboCop game? First off, the RoboCop games have not been very good historically.
Yep.
But two, it was like it doesn't seem like there's no reason to be doing it, right? Like there's not a new RoboCop movie coming out or something. It felt weird. This game is really fun. So like they have modeled like these very destructible environments. So like when you're shooting, you're in an office building and you're shooting and the pillars are like exploding chunks of concrete and computer monitors are exploding with glass. And you can shoot guys and they'll fall through the windows and fall like down out of the skyscraper that you're in. It's like, this is the demo. Like maybe this is a small chunk of the game and maybe this doesn't actually represent what the final game will be. That's a really cool looking game so far. And I'm really shocked by that game.
What is it? Is it like a third-person shooter?
No, it's a first person
Okay.
shooter. You are viewing, you have you seen RoboCop the movie?
No.
Okay, so like RoboCop, when you're seeing like through his eyes, and so it does the little things like the little targeting.
Oh, okay.
And it has the little like sort of like monochrome green visuals and superimposed over that. Yeah, this is the developer who made the Terminator game from a couple years back, which also got very surprised positive reviews for that game. And now they're making a RoboCop game that's actually seems good.
Yeah, I joke that RoboCop is eternal. My only real familiarity with RoboCop is that the Game Boy RoboCop game has like the best theme song of all time. It's up there with Buck Bumble in terms of how good it is.
I completely get your reaction. A RoboCop game. This doesn't feel in the year 2023. Why are we getting a RoboCop game? But this developer seems very impassioned with what they're doing. They seem to be going the extra step with it.
All right. Well, they did Terminator and then RoboCop, so now I'm looking forward to a Yonoid remake that they're gonna do and just reinvent the genre.
I mean, at this point, a Yonoid game is maybe the least surprising thing I could imagine.
Game of the year 2023. Yonoid.
I would not be surprised at all if we get another Yonoid game.
Well, I mean, okay, so just along with this too, a news story. So, Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love's daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, married Tony Hawk's son. And
Riley Hawk.
Yeah, and the officiant of their wedding was Michael Stipe from REM. It's just, and now RoboCop is coming out.
It's the most Gen X thing you can ever imagine.
Like, whew, I thought I was 13. I was like, oh goodness.
And the connection to video games is Riley Hawk is in that Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake. So
I will say, I mean, I didn't watch the partner showcase. There are a number of games on here that I have never heard of, so I'll look forward to watching some of those trailers. Ikaro Will Not Die, Still Wakes the Deep, Manor Lords, not familiar with.
yeah, Still Wakes the Deep. I don't think it's maybe the best trailer, but that game looks interesting. You're on like an oil platform, and it seems to be collapsing around you, but there seems to be something after you, and you're kind of like going through the internal structure of that. So had a really cool wet look to it. Like one of those games where everything's wet, and you're like, that looks cool.
All right. Is Spirit of the North, is that a Fist of the North Star?
No, that is, you are playing as a fox.
Oh, okay.
And then the finals was the one I wasn't familiar with, so maybe that was an entirely new one.
I've seen the finals.
Okay.
I don't know if it was in beta when I saw it or if it's just coming to Xbox. It's another sort of team shooter, like an Apex.
Yeah, the thing that intrigued me about it from the trailer was it seemed to have very destructible environments. So like they were showing like there's somebody above you and you blowing out the floor and dropping them down and shooting them, and that seemed cool. Like it seemed to be some of the mechanics of what is it, Rainbow Six Siege.
Okay.
But like extrapolating those into a more traditional sort of shooter environment.
Yeah, I know the change, assuming I'm thinking of the right game, I'm pretty sure it's the finals. Rather than it being a sort of traditional battle royale, you collect money like throughout the game. So like a kill gets you some amount of money, wiping a team gets you some amount of money, and you deposit that into like a bank. And so it's not like kills or things like that wins you the game. It's how much money you have at the end of it. And so you can like steal people's money or like sort of get it from them by killing them or like getting all those things. And so it has its own little flavor to it, the games of service. I know that's what we've talked about, right? You have to have something different, and that's the thing that this one is doing different.
Yeah, I don't know about the money part, but that sounds really similar to Sony had that first party like team shooter that they were doing that was about like people breaking in, stealing stuff and everything into levels.
Oh, the one that they announced earlier this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's from the Assassin's Creed person.
Yeah, Jade Raymond.
Yeah, she left. I forget what that game is called.
I do too. Those are the type of games I never remember until they pop up again. I'm like, this looks familiar.
$, I want to say, in the
Yes, it did. Yeah. It did have a $sign in the name. It was something like Breakers with a $sign on this. Yeah, I mean, so like again, nothing too mind blowing here, but I mean, I think there are several games here that look interesting, and there's some diversity of games here too, which I think is pretty interesting. This isn't all first person shooters or all games of service, so that's kind of fun. Ark is one of those games that I find incredibly intimidating. I feel like it's the sort of game it has to be your life or you're just not playing that game. Let's see. Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis has been rated by the ESRB for PC, so it looks like it will be coming to PC at some point. That's not too surprising. Like, you're making a game today, especially as Square Enix. Why would you just not put that game everywhere? Five Nights at Freddy's. This is the movie, which came out today in theaters and on the Peacock. That's the NBC streaming service. Has a 35% on Rotten Tomatoes. So, question is anybody excited to see the Five Nights at Freddy's movie?
I feel like I answered this earlier by saying I avoid spooky.
So I wouldn't say I'm looking forward to it, but I will probably watch it.
So are you more dreading it?
I wouldn't say dread, but But like, I was like, you know what? I think this game would actually, it would make a good movie. It makes sense to make it a movie.
Yeah,
right?
I think it makes sense. Sure.
And so I was watching, or I saw the trailer because like I opened up Peacock and it was the first thing that was showing up there. So I just watched a trailer and it doesn't look that bad, but 35 on Rotten Tomatoes is a bit. But yeah,
I would agree with that. The trailer made it seem intriguing enough.
Yeah.
I know I'm not going to watch it, but
I think the problem for me is they already released that film that was a complete ripoff starring Nicolas Cage that looked like it was made on a budget of like $200. Have you not seen that?
I have not. No.
this is a fairly recent movie then.
Yeah, it's Nicolas Cage, and he stops at like some little roadside restaurant, and it's a shuttered, Chuck E. Cheese like, which is the premise of Five Nights at Freddy's. Except it really looks like they just got some restaurant and they tried to dress it up like a Chuck E. Cheese. Like they didn't have the budget for it. OJ, are you looking up the title? I can't remember what the name of that film was. And I have not seen it. I've seen the trailer for that film. It looked really bad.
And it has Nicolas Cage?
Well,
That's not part of that. It's bad. It has but I'm just like,
well, I mean, but like Nicolas Cage at this point in his career is doing like
Sure.
9 of these like direct to video movies for every real movie. he
weird
does.
indie film.
Yeah.
Willy's Wonderland is what it's called.
Yeah.
You could have offered me $1 billion and I would have never even known this movie existed.
So that movie, I think, got mostly sort of negative reviews. I don't think it reviewed super well. But, if I am thinking of a Five Nights at Freddy's movie starring Nicolas Cage, that actually sounds pretty interesting to me. And this one stars like the kid from Hunger Games, Josh Hutcherson.
I think that's what I was thinking as well.
Yeah, so nothing against him. Like, he's fine, but he doesn't carry quite the fun of Nicolas Cage starring in it.
What? You said Willy's Wonderland. I thought there was a video game also called Willy's Wonderland.
There might be.
It's not. Like, when I Googled it, but it's another similar sort of Five Nights at Freddy's type of game, but I don't know what it's called now. I would have guessed Willy's Wonderland.
I think that says a lot about these properties.
Yeah.
Like, their titles, you could guess, would be terrible.
Yeah.
So that movie is now out. If you are looking for something to watch this weekend and you already have Peacock for whatever reason, you can definitely watch that on there for free and not actually go to the theater and spend $10 to see Five Nights at Freddy's. Let's see. Insomniac has apologized and patched out the Cuban flag that was in Spider-Man 2. So this is kind of a funny, interesting story. So in Spider-Man 2, Miles Morales, his family's ancestry is Puerto Rican. The Puerto Rico and Cuba flags are extremely similar. So one is a red triangle on the left side with blue stripes, and one is a blue triangle on the left side with red stripes. And so apparently somebody developing this game got those confused. They put in the Cuba flag instead of the Puerto Rico flag. So Insomniac has apologized and put out a patch that corrects it. This isn't, there's no real controversy here, but this is actually, I think, good of Insomniac to like make this change. We talk about cultural representation is important for people to see themselves in games. This is them trying to get that right, even though they made a mistake initially. Nobody should be mad at Insomniac. Please, insane people on social media, do not turn this into something controversial. This is just a company doing the right thing after a minor mistake was made. But I very much expect to see this on right-wing Twitter soon.
Sure.
Disney Dreamlight Valley is leaving early access on December 5th, and it will no longer be going free to play. So originally this game, you could pay to play it during its early access period, and then it was going to go free to play for everyone. They have backtracked on that now, saying everyone will have to pay. I'm sure that has something to do with how successful or unsuccessful this game is being. And I don't really understand which it is because I don't feel like anybody talks about this game hardly. But, you know, they're still putting out new content for it. So I do see updates now and then. So somebody must be playing it. And they must think they're going to make some money. Somebody will pay them to play it.
Yeah. I could see it being a popular family game. It's on Game Pass. At least it was on Game Pass for a while. So
yeah, that's where I played it.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was fine, right? It just there wasn't a hook there to keep me playing it was the big issue. But like a little kid, I can see really getting into this game and enjoying it quite a bit. All right, that does it for news for this week. So that just leaves our big question. And our big question as we're headed into Halloween is, which video game character would you dress for as Halloween? And yes, I'm pretty sure we've done a version of this before, but it's a new year. And so you don't recycle costumes. You're going to wear something new and different, right? That's the fun of it. So, OJ, why don't we start with you? If you could dress as any Halloween or any video game character for this Halloween, which character would you choose?
So I would love a really, really well done Samus suit to go as Samus. Cool. And then I would have a long blonde wig and I could take the helmet off and surprise people. Because for those who don't know, I'm bald and I'm always wearing a hat. But if I pulled off the hat and had like the long blonde Samus hair just to surprise everybody, I think that would be a fantastic costume.
And you also want like the slow motion Farrah Fawcett moment where you like just shake your head and your long blonde locks go flying everywhere.
And there would be a fan.
Yeah.
Just blowing
Of course.
Yeah.
While like some rock song plays in the background.
Yes.
80s pop music in the background. Yeah. That would be funny just if you had like the fan and like, you know, something to play the music and everything. You carried it so that every time you walked into a room, you did that.
Yes.
I can see you walking through this building, just walking into room after room.
Walk into everybody's office.
Right. Every classroom. That would be great. Like really devoting yourself to the bit, I think sells that, makes that work. Mario, how about you?
So, unsurprisingly, I have gone as Mario for Halloween, but I feel like at this point...
That surprises me a little.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah.
At this point, if I were to go as a video game character, it would be the wise old man from old school RuneScape. Nobody would probably recognize who this is. They just think, oh, he's a wizard. But he's got like this blue crown and these huge goggles and like a white beard and like this green cloak. This is what he looks like. You can't see it if you're listening, but yes, that is who I would go dressed up as.
All right. See, I think like for you, like I would say, don't go as Mario, go as Luigi.
Fair enough.
Like really screw with people's heads. And then when people are like, hey Mario, you came as Mario, you'd be like, I did not.
I'm somebody different. All the, hey, where's Luigi? Like, he's here now.
We have merged into one being.
I would say over the years, you should go as Kirby, as Link,
the whole
as
Smash
everybody except for Mario.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. Like if you just went as every character except Mario.
Well, I guess the final, whenever I'm done here, I'll do a Dr. Mario playthrough, and then I can. That'll be the final. That'll be the ultimate goal.
Okay. When you graduate, you have to walk across the stage dressed as Dr. Mario. The little like light on your head and the stethoscope and the white coat and everything. I don't think they can make you not wear that. But like, or you have on your cap and gown, and as soon as they hand you your diploma, you like rip it all off, and you're wearing that underneath.
Well, that if the comm department does its own like little small celebration.
No. You have to do this in front of all SIU.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there would be like 7 people like, oh, he did it. And everybody was like, what the hell?
No, because they would
Why does he
read your
dress up as
name.
a medical doctor? This is comm studies.
Those comm PhDs are idiots. I think this makes them a medical doctor. He didn't take one anatomy class the entire time. Where are they getting these maroons? Oh, yes, that makes it even better. So my answer is also an obscure character. I would, well, maybe not as obscure because he does show up in Wreck-It Ralph. I would go as Coily from Q*bert, so the purple snake, which I absolutely, I have problems with Wreck-It Ralph. Though the first one I think is a pretty good, like, you know, kids film and everything. But like I wish it had done more with the video game aspect. Because what they did do, I think they actually did pretty good. And then they did that terrible, terrible sequel. But one of my favorite parts in that is that they make Coily like this very sympathetic character, right? Which originally he's a villain in Q*bert, but they make him very sympathetic, like almost like a little sick puppy, you know, because he doesn't have any food and Ralph is sharing the food with them so that they have something to eat. And so I think that would be a fantastic character. And Q*bert's one of my favorite games. And also I think like dressing as a giant purple snake would be interesting. I don't know how that costume would work. Yeah, I guess I'm a giant snake walking around. I don't know how you get around if you're in a snake costume. Maybe that has to be a multi-person costume.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I think it was Heidi Klum that went as a worm last year, like a super realistic worm.
I don't.
That's
that
interesting.
I did not know.
Okay.
Well, go ahead.
I was gonna
I'm
say,
changing
like-
the subject. Well, staying on Justin's topic, but yeah.
So Heidi Klum does like really elaborate. I think it's Heidi Klum. Watch me be wrong, but somebody did a really, really realistic worm costume last year for Halloween, and I was gonna say you could do a really realistic coiled purple snake.
I think it becomes unrealistic as soon as I'm a purple snake, but like there probably are purple snakes.
Yeah.
What I was gonna say, so it like
Come in
'cause
all colors.
in the game it like bounces like on
Yes.
the coil, right? I was gonna say what you could do is you could like get some like moon shoes and just like bounce throughout it, but like you make it so that the bottom looks just like a coil.
That sounds like it would be like super exhausting to my legs,
I think it'd be fine.
especially if I did it like on a day I'm actually like teaching, walking around. Oh, that is unsettling.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm showing the Heidi Klum worm
That
costume.
is, yeah.
Stop and
I had
Google
not
that.
seen it, and
Yeah.
yeah, unsettling is the proper word. Hyper realistic worm.
Sorry, I'm making a note here. And so we will just
So
working on
Stall for
titles
time.
for this podcast.
yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, I think that would be exhausting to hop around campus all day. But yeah, like that might be a way to pull that off. If I was going to a Halloween party where I would be in one location, I wouldn't have to move around all that much. That might be more doable. I don't know how Heidi Klum got around in her hyper realistic worm costume.
Oh, I think it was like little tiny baby steps.
I suppose as a model, she's used to
Yeah.
like weird walking and everything. So she is better prepared to play a hyper realistic worm than anyone else. It feels like there's got to be a role in the MCU for her now.
Yes.
All right. See, this is why we need Alicia. Alicia could tell us what is the giant worm character in the MCU.
Earthworm Jim. Oh wait, no, that's a video game, but yeah.
I'm sure there is some like character in the MCU. So anyways, that does it for us for this week. As always, if you want past episodes or more of our content, you can go to salukigames.com. Thank you, OJ and Mario, for joining me this week. Alicia, shame on you for not being here. Actually, Alicia is, I think, presenting at a conference. So good for Alicia.
She's in Chicago with her sister. She's seeing a Sonic concert.
Yeah.
Then
So shame on you.
shame. For shame, Alicia. Oh man, I don't even know if we need to allow her back on this one. Going specifically to a Sonic concert.
It's academic as well. Remember, it's a Sonic concert, but she's going to get a Malcolm X speech in there as well.
I think it would be of more value to her if she went to a Sonic drive-in. At least she's getting food there, right? Like, at least she will survive. Like, a Sonic concert might drive you over the edge, let's be honest.
Food for the soul. For Alicia's soul, at least. Maybe not anybody else's.
But thank you for everyone listening. We will be back next week with another episode. Until then, have a very good week. Have a very spooky Halloween and be safe out there.